Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Malted Bampot and welcome to the Independent for Tuesday the 28th of August. So chances are you may be a new viewer to this show. If you're not, welcome back, but if you are, this is a daily show where I go through the latest and greatest games coming out on that day and talk about which ones may be worth your money. We generally place a focus on good games because on any particular day there are a lot. Therefore, we whittle down and sift through the nonsense to try and find the best titles most worthy of attention. The show does indeed give a preference to indie titles, and that will be where most of the focus lies, but certainly we point out AAAs as we go. The whole point is to try and help you find hidden gems that you otherwise would not come across. So without further ado, allow me to present the top 10 most interesting games coming out today. Okay, kicking off today we have Strange Brigade, which is out on PC and consoles. This is a third-person shooter with a huge emphasis on co-op. If you've ever played any of the Uncharted games, particularly the online modes or the co-op modes, then this is very similar to that. It has a very interesting theme, to be honest, set in, I believe, 1930s, basically the same environment as the Mummy movies, if you've ever seen them. Now, the marketing may not be too clear, but you can indeed play this game single player, although there's clearly an emphasis on co-op action, and this is emphasised by the fact that there are 4 main characters, each with different abilities and even magic powers in some cases. So this has been put together by the same guys that made the Sniper Elite series, which isn't what I would describe as critically acclaimed, but certainly aren't bad games in any way, and have a solid fan base. At the time of recording, reviews are fairly thin on the ground, but initial reception seems to be fairly positive, although I would be wary of the fact that with the AAA production values comes the usual issues and potential scope for the game to be heavily monetized post-release. As it stands, there is indeed a season pass, but the game does also promise free monthly content updates. What that actually means and translates to into real terms, well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. Time will tell how toxic the business model is. Let's hope it's one of the good ones, like Mass Effect 3. Sorry, I just choked on something there. I would also like to point out that the Steam version of the game does carry the Novu DRM, which has been causing a lot of problems for people recently, and I know that certainly some people will avoid games altogether if they carry that software, so overall, this looks like an interesting title. It's not going to redefine gaming, but nevertheless could be fun if you have a team to play it with. Next up, we have The Blob 2 coming to Switch today. So of course this is not a new game and was released on tons of platforms all the way back in 2011. And even just last year, it was released on PC, PS4 and Xbox One, so basically you can play this in just about every format in existence at this point, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Blob 2 has received widespread acclaim across the board, and the game mechanics revolve around colour. It's very likely that this series inspired Splatoon if you've ever played that. So included in this version over the original is a 2-player co-op mode, while the second player controls a character called Pinky, not related to Pinky in the Brain as far as I'm aware. All in all, based on existing reviews which have obviously been out for a while now, this is a safe title to add to your Switch itinerary if you're looking for something a bit different, particularly, as I say, if you're a fan of Splatoon. Just note that there is more of an emphasis on platforming compared to the first The Blob game, so if you're particularly platform averse, you might want to watch some gameplay videos and see the game in action before purchasing. Next up today we have a game called Molecats, and it's releasing on Steam. So this is a puzzle game through and through, which has been in early access for just about a year now. The best way to describe this is to say that it is similar to Lemmings, you know, the little green-haired guys made by a bunch of sycophants out of Dundee in Scotland. So the little Molecats go about their business, and it's up to you to rotate the world around them and guide them to safety. Reviews of this are actually rather thin on the ground, but what is fairly clear is that it's not for the faint of heart. Certainly not a casual puzzler anyway, as things get pretty difficult and rage-inducing pretty quickly. Interestingly, however, seemingly in contrast to this difficulty, is what the developer describes as a non-failure gameplay style. Now, what this means in practice is not so clear, but apparently you can't lose. If you fail to do what the game wants you to, then you are simply punished by being given more puzzles to do, which strikes me as a similar mentality to banks charging you for failed direct debit payments, although I feel that Molecats is much less likely to bring about another recession. You never know. Next up today we have Firewall 0 Hour, which is releasing on the PlayStation 4, specifically the PlayStation VR. So this is a 4 versus 4 tactical FPS, and to be honest, I would maybe say that the word tactical is slightly misplaced here, in so much as the action doesn't seem to be quick enough to provide scope for highbrow strategic gameplay. It's not a fast-paced shooter, your movement is on the slower side, which is definitely a byproduct of the VR aspect, but nevertheless it's not necessarily a bad thing. The game instead seems to be more about being careful and getting better and faster at filling the opposing team with lead whenever they come into view. However, based on playtests thus far, teamwork does still seem to be important, or at least moving as a team does. Lone wolfing will likely get you killed, and communication is intended to play a big role. Now, whether the gameplay actually demands this or not for you to be successful, well, that's currently unknown. There is no single player campaign here outside of a tutorial or training mode, and you can play using the DualShock 4, although using the PlayStation VR aim controller really enhances the experience, as you can imagine. Now, it is worth noting that while the PlayStation VR is generally considered to be the least advanced VR headset and thus the least sensitive when it comes to controls, reports so far have described this game as controlling very naturally and easily. So that's one of the outright deal breakers for a VR game like this, isn't it? So it's good to know that the initial feedback is positive, but of course take that with a pinch of salt nonetheless, as very few people have played the game so far, and to be honest probably ever will. Which is indeed a bit of a shame, because it does seem that if you have a good team with you, if you have friends to play this with, and you all have VR headsets, then this could be lots of fun. It's nice to see what the VR scene is doing these days, but certainly these cooperative based games are going to have small scope and a fairly limited audience as it stands, but nonetheless that doesn't mean that they're not worthwhile making, and if you do fit the requirements, then this looks pretty fun, I have to say. Nevertheless, wait for reviews, because when it comes to VR games like this, there are lots of things that could potentially become very annoying very quickly, especially when it comes to movement. So, let me ask you a question. Do you like putting things in your hole? Over time, do you grow tired with your normal day-to-day objects and yearn for larger, more exciting things to cram in your hole? If so, then Donut County may well be the game you've been waiting for. So, in Donut County you play the role of a sinkhole, and your mission is to, well, do what sinkholes do, swallow up everything you possibly can. If you're thinking that this is a weird and crazy concept for a game, then yes, you'd be right, because this is one of the titles that came around as a result of Molly Jam. If you're not aware, this is a game jam that took place back in 2012 off the back of the Twitter account called Peter Molly Do. Yes, Molly Do, not Molly New. Do, not New. You may have heard this story before, but back in 2009, a comedic crusader by the name of Adam Capone created a parody Twitter account of Peter Molyneux and started putting up exactly the sort of things you'd expect. Outrageous, often downright silly game ideas filled with wild hyperbole and blue sky wackiness. So what started off as a joke eventually gained a following and support from Molyneux himself, and ended up with thousands of indie developers meeting up for a Molly Jam and brainstorming crazy game ideas. So now here we have it, Donut County, a game where your hole swallows stuff, as the actress said to the bishop. This is releasing on iOS, PS4 and PC. There are some reviews out already, and the general reception actually seems to be positive. Definitely there are some complaints around the length of the gameplay, which is apparently only a couple of hours long, which isn't ideal, but the basic idea of the game, that of an inverse Katamari Damacy, is reportedly solid and heaps of fun. So if you're in the mood for something zany and totally off-kilter, this could be one to check out, ya donut. Next up we have Switchblade, coming to PC and PS4. This is nice and simple to describe. It is a third-person vehicle-based MOBA where you deck it out in a team of 5 versus 5. Your objective is to capture the opponent's tower by, of course, blowing them to pieces by any and all means necessary. Definitely parallels to be drawn here with Rocket League and even Paragon, Epic Games MOBA that was shut down back in April because of a small indie title called Fortnite. So this is entering early access, therefore information is thin on the ground. There are some gameplay videos up already on YouTube, but they are, I believe, mostly sponsored or from the closed beta, so actual user feedback is still to come. This is coming from the same team that made Project Gotham Racing, which actually I really enjoyed. I used to play PGR3 a lot for some reason. I say some reason because I can't think of any outrageously amazing aspects to it. It was just simply an enjoyable racing game. So the same guys were also involved with Goat Simulator though, so well, at least they made some YouTubers money. Haha, aren't broken games just so funny? Ultimately, not a huge amount more can be said about this title right now. The quality of a MOBA is usually all about how it plays out mechanically at different stages of the game, which we won't know until there's a decent sample size of reviews. For all you know, next year's TI could be Switchblade instead of Dota. I don't think so. Next up, we have yet another VR game actually, but a rather interesting one at that. And while the VR footprint is still very small across the gaming populace, it is interesting to see the direction things are going. And Torn certainly looks like one of the interesting ones. So it starts off as a narrative puzzler, and then apparently evolves into a somewhat dark, creepy, character-driven story. Dark is probably the best word for this game, with inspiration being taken from the Twilight Zone and Black Mirror apparently. Throughout the game you make use of a gravity tool, which is a wand-like implement that allows you to control objects and move them around. This is how you interact with the environment and solve puzzles. There are some pretty big names behind this, to be honest, including folks that worked on BioShock's story and soundtrack, which certainly cannot be a bad thing. Without a doubt, VR games do struggle a lot right now when it comes to including sufficient mechanical depth to be more than just an experience and actually be an enjoyable, engaging game. From the marketing, however, it looks like the developer does understand this and have tried to include a bit more depth through an extensive physics system. I mean, that is a bit of a buzzword, so we should probably temper our expectations accordingly, but this does come into play as you move objects around using your wand, apparently. The developers, Aspire Media, are based out of Austin and are one of the leading publishers of Mac OS ports. They do a lot of the big boy work as well, such as Call of Duty, Star Wars and Borderlands. So they certainly seem technically switched on and have the skill set to pull off an engaging VR game like this. But as I said, mechanical depth is still a challenge in the VR scene, so it will be interesting to see some extended gameplay in action for this one. Next up, we have Fear the Wolves on PC, which is a Battle Royale. Yeah, another one. But it's on this list because while the genre is indeed the bandwagoning hot topic right now, this title stood out by honestly having a definite air of professionalism about it. So it's entering early access and the current projection is for it to be released properly on PC and consoles next year at some point. So just bear that in mind while watching the trailer, which definitely has some pretty hefty screen tearing going on. So yes, expect the usual 100-person death orgy, but with a few twists intended to lubricate the proceedings. Oh, what a gorgeous metaphor. Absolutely delicious. In Fear the Wolves, you don't just need to contend with other players, but as the title would suggest, packs of wolves as well, along with some other nasties such as mutants. It's set in the same environment as Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl, so that explains the more exotic enemy encounters. However, matches aren't just a case of last man standing. Near the end of each game, an extraction helicopter will appear, and it becomes a desperate scramble to get the hell out of there. There are also weather effects that change the landscape and dynamic of the game, and these can be voted for by in-game spectators. So everything I've mentioned so far is allegedly working and available from today, but as I say, Vostok Games, the developer, seem to be approaching this fairly well from an early access standpoint and have included a clear roadmap for what's coming next. Granted, the proof of the pudding is most certainly in the eating, and there are plenty of devs that have promised the world but barely managed to deliver Luxembourg. But at least this looks promising. They definitely aren't a bunch of 12-year-olds that have just discovered the Unreal Engine. because then the game would be called Fortnite instead. Sorry, that wasn't funny. Fortnite is a very good game, I'll have you know. It's a very good game. Might be one to keep your eye on if Battle Royale is something you're still interested in at this point. Today's penultimate entry is Blade Strangers, a 2D brawler with a very interesting theme. The combatants in this game are characters from other indie games, including a few from the dev's own library. Ever wanted to see Shovel Knight smash Isaac from The Binding of Isaac in the face with, well, a massive shovel? Then this ticks that box indeed. It ticks it like a MF. This is designed to be an accessible fighting game, so while there is plenty of scope for frame counting and other brawler scientific method, they've tried hard to make sure that new gamers can pick up the title and get stuck in. This makes sense as they are obviously trying to maximise the game's reach through its included cast of characters. It'd be a bit unfortunate to get someone excited about the inclusion of one of their favourite indie game characters only to hit them with an outrageous learning curve, so thankfully they're not doing that. Mashup games like this are always fairly interesting, but obviously often rely on having a good spread of familiar characters. So it does look like this will be the case here, and may well be worth putting on your radar if you're in the market for a brawler. The game is out today on PC, PS4 and the Nintendo Switch. And last but certainly not least today is Victor Vran Overkill Edition, which is coming to the Nintendo Switch. It was originally released on PC in 2015 with a PS4 and Xbox One release just last year. So now it's the Switch's turn, and if you haven't heard of this game before, well honestly you're in for a treat. It's an action RPG where you take on the role of a demon hunter to the backdrop of Motorhead. And yeah, their involvement doesn't just stop in terms of the soundtrack, because with the Overkill Edition, which includes all the DLC for the game, you get Motorhead through the ages as well. This is additional content made in partnership with the band, whose narrative implies that at some point in time, Lemmy stumbled into an alternate dimension infested with demons. Explains a lot, to be honest. The gameplay itself is focused on fast-paced combat and even includes jumping as a mechanic, woohoo, as well as bringing a degree of verticality to the levels and puzzles. You can choose to play Victor Vran in numerous different ways, and with various difficulty settings. I don't think many people have hailed this as topping games such as Diablo 3, but it has been out for a while on other platforms and the reception has generally been positive. There has certainly been some criticism around the gameplay getting a little bit stale over time and a somewhat clunky inventory system, but there doesn't seem to be anything here that you could consider a fatal flaw. Ultimately, it's really nice to see titles like this coming to the Switch, and it looks like a solid one to put on your list if you have even a passing interest in the dungeon crawler genre. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Malted Bampot, and this has been your daily installment of the Independent. If you enjoyed this video, then please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and of course, tune back in for tomorrow's episode, which will be same place, same time, and with plenty of more interesting games coming up. Once again, I've been Malted Bampot, that's Malted with an M, and Bampot with a B. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you again tomorrow.